My wife slept with my twin brother. After a party while drunk and tried to claim she thought it was me. I don't even know how to start this because everything in my life is just collapsing, and this is a way to vent it all out. I, 32, have been married to my wife Talia, 31F, for 5 years. It hasn't always been perfect, but I thought we were happy. We've faced our big problems and our biggest faults in our relationship like any couple. We were stable, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last weekend. My twin brother, Ron, 32M, has always been there. We are identical twins, and if you looked at us, you probably wouldn't be able to notice any crazy differences. While we've never been the inseparable kind of twins, we've stayed close enough. We always saw each other regularly at family gatherings or casual hangouts. I never thought there was anything strange about his relationship with Talia. She was polite to him, maybe even friendly, but nothing that raised any red flags. Everything kicked off at a party we hosted at our house. We had been planning it for weeks, inviting friends, setting up decorations, and making sure we had enough food and drinks for everyone. It was supposed to be a night to relax, catch up with friends, and let loose. I guess I let loose too much. The night started out great. People were mingling, the music was loud, and the drinks were flowing. I don't drink heavy so much, but it was one of those nights where people kept handing me shots, and I didn't want to be the buzzkill. At some point, I lost track of how much I had. All I remember was sitting on the couch in the living room, feeling the alcohol hit me all at once. That's the last clear memory I have. Then the next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and the nausea that comes from too much alcohol. I was still on the couch, half covered with a throw blanket someone must have tossed over me during the night. The house was eerily quiet, except for the sound of my wife moving around in the kitchen. When I got up and stumbled into the kitchen, she barely acknowledged me. She was staring into her coffee like it held all the answers to the universe. Her posture was off, her shoulders were tense, and she didn't even look into my eyes when I greeted her. At first, I thought maybe she was hungover too, but the vibe was off. I asked her how the party went after I crashed, trying to gauge if something unusual had happened. She shrugged and muttered, "It was fine," before changing the subject. I let it go for the moment, thinking she might just be tired. The rest of the day was strange. She kept herself busy, cleaning up the house and avoiding any sort of real conversation with me. When I tried to help her with the cleanup, she brushed me off, saying she had it under control. By the afternoon, her behavior was eating away at me. Talia isn't usually this distant, even when we are fighting or when she's stressed. This type of behavior was off. Finally, I decided to confront her about it. We were in the living room, and I asked her point blank if something was wrong. Her face went pale, and she started fidgeting with her sweater. That's when she dropped the bomb. She said she needed to tell me something. Her words came out quickly, and she said she had slept with someone at the party. My mind blanked for a moment. I asked her who, almost afraid to hear the answer. When she said Ron's name, it felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I couldn't believe it. My twin brother? My wife? The betrayal stung deep. She was crying by this point, saying it was a mistake and that she didn't mean for it to happen. She claimed she was drunk and thought Ron was me. That explanation didn't sit right with me. We might be twins, but we're not identical in every way. Our voices are different, our mannerisms are different, and she's been with me for years. How could she not know? I couldn't even respond. I just stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't know how it happened and that she hated herself for it. But her words felt empty. How could this have been an accident? I walked out of the room. I didn't trust myself to say anything in that moment. My mind was racing with questions I didn't know if I wanted the answers to. How could they do this to me? How long had this been going on? Was it really just a one-time mistake, or was this something more? I spent the rest of the night on the couch, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could picture was my wife and Ron together. It was a lot to process. The next morning, I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I needed to talk to Ron. I needed to hear his side of the story. I couldn't imagine how this just happened, and I was suspicious about this just being some accident. When I called him, he sounded completely normal, like nothing had happened. That only made me angrier. I told him I was coming over and he said, "Sure," like it was any other day. When I got to his place, I didn't even sit down. I asked him what happened, and his response pissed me off more than I already was. He said they were both drunk, and it just happened, like it was no big deal. He didn't even seem sorry. Hearing him talk about it so casually broke something in me. I couldn't believe how little he seemed to care about what he'd done. I left without saying much else, feeling defeated and lost. Now I'm sitting here, trying to figure out what to do. My wife betrayed me. My brother betrayed me. Even if it was a mistake, I feel like I'm stuck and I don't know what to do. After leaving Ron's place, I drove around aimlessly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My head was spinning and my chest felt tight, like I couldn't catch my breath. The betrayal from Talia was one thing, but from Ron, that's just brutal. We grew up together, shared everything as kids, and even when we fought, I always thought there was an unspoken boundary neither of us would ever cross. Now, it was clear that didn't exist for him. By the time I got home, I felt drained, both physically and emotionally. Talia was waiting for me, sitting on the edge of the couch. She looked like she'd been crying. Her face was pale and crumpled. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, but I knew we couldn't avoid the conversation. I needed answers, even if they tore me apart. I asked her to tell me everything, starting with the party. I was hoping for some kind of clarity, some explanation that made sense, but all I got was more confusion. She stuck to the story that it was a drunken mistake, that she had thought Ron was me. The more she talked, the more angry I got. Her words didn't match what I already knew, and I could see her struggling to keep her story straight. She claimed she didn't realize it wasn't me until it was too late, but that just didn't add up. Ron and I may look similar, but there are clear differences between us. I kept pressing her, asking how she could possibly make that kind of mistake. She got defensive, saying it was dark, she was drunk, and she wasn't thinking clearly. But even with all those excuses, it didn't make sense. This wasn't a stranger she'd confused for me. This was my twin brother, someone she spent years around. I asked her how it even started, and her answer made me feel sick. She said Ron had been hanging around her at the party, chatting with her while I was out of it on the couch. She claimed it was innocent at first, just small talk, but then things escalated. She didn't say how or why, only that it just happened. Her vague responses felt like lies being thrown in my face, like she was still hiding something. By this point, I couldn't listen to her anymore. I walked away, locking myself in the bathroom to clear my head. The thought of the two of them together made me feel done. I kept picturing the party, imagining them sneaking off while I was unconscious downstairs, oblivious to what was happening. It was humiliating, like the life I thought I had was a joke, and everyone else was in on it, but me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to piece together the truth from the bits I'd been given. I thought about one of our close friends, fake name. Claire's comments, how she'd seen Ron and Talia acting close at the party, and it only made me more suspicious. Was this really a one-time mistake, or had there been something going on before that night? I didn't know what to believe anymore. The next day, I decided to call Claire. I needed more information, and I trusted her to tell me the truth. She didn't hold back. She said Ron and Talia had been sitting together for most of the night, laughing and whispering like they were in their own little world. She even noticed them disappear upstairs together at one point, though she assumed they were just getting something or talking in private. Hearing that confirmed what I'd been hoping wasn't true. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment accident. It felt planned and deliberate. I confronted my wife again, armed with what Claire had told me. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She froze, paused for a second, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny it. But instead, she started crying again, saying she didn't want to lose me and begging me to forgive her. She kept insisting it was just a mistake, that she wasn't thinking clearly, but I didn't believe her anymore. It was obvious she was lying to protect herself. I asked her point blank if anything had been going on with Ron before the party, and she swore there hadn't. But the way she avoided any eye contact and the hesitation in her voice, it was all too telling. She wasn't being honest with me, and I couldn't take it anymore. I told her I needed space and left the house. Over the next few days, I tried to figure out what to do. My emotions were all over the place. Anger, sadness, disbelief. I kept thinking about how Ron and my wife had both looked me in the eye so many times before this, acting like everything was fine while they did what they did behind my back. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't keep this to myself. My family deserved to know the truth. I called my parents and told them I needed to talk. When I got to their house, I sat them down and explained everything. How Talia had confessed to sleeping with Ron, how she tried to blame it on being drunk, and how I suspected this wasn't the first time something had happened between them. They were shocked, to say the least. My mom started crying, and my dad looked furious. Ron had always been the golden child in their eyes, but this was too much even for them. My mom kept asking if I was sure, if maybe it was all a misunderstanding, but I shut that down quickly. I told them I wasn't looking for excuses. I just wanted them to know what kind of person Ron really was. My dad said he wanted to speak to Ron himself, but I told him not to bother. I was done with both of them. Back at home, Talia tried to talk to me again, but I couldn't even look at her. I told her I needed time to think, but the truth was, I already knew what I had to do. Our marriage is over. There is no coming back from this kind of thing. The trust is gone, and without that, there is nothing left to salvage. I will see how everything goes now. Update 1. After I told my parents everything, I thought I'd feel some kind of relief, but it only made things worse. Their reaction, though supportive, opened a floodgate of emotions. My mom cried for hours, unable to understand how her family had reached this point, and my dad was angrier than I'd ever seen him. It was clear they were as blindsided as I was, and it made the betrayal feel even heavier. I knew I had to face Ron again. The first conversation had been surface level, and now that I had some time to think, I realized there were too many gaps in his version of the truth. The way he shrugged it off like it was nothing didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was almost mocking. I needed to confront him properly, not just for clarity, but to release the anger that had been eating me alive since this nightmare began. When I went to his apartment, I was ready for a fight, but his demeanor caught me off guard. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. It was the first time I'd seen any sign of guilt from him. I didn't let it soften me though. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving until I got them. I demanded to know what had really happened at the party. This time, he wasn't as dismissive as before, but his explanation was just as infuriating. He admitted that Talia had approached him first, but he claimed it was in the moment, and that he didn't think it through. The casual way he just described what they did felt like the extra bit of disrespect on top of what they already did. It was like he didn't realize, or didn't care, about the damage he'd caused. What really broke me was when he said it wasn't the first time she'd been too friendly with him. He described a handful of moments over the years when she'd been overly flirty, brushing it off as harmless. He insisted he never acted on it before, but the fact that he never mentioned it to me just made me look at him differently. I know if he had a wife who would come on to me, I'd immediately let him know what type of person she is. If he'd told me back then, I could have dealt with Talia, and maybe none of this would have happened. Hearing all of this made one thing clear. This wasn't a one-off mistake. There was history here, whether they admitted it fully or not. It was like every piece of trust I'd ever had in either of them was being torn down. I walked out of Ron's apartment without saying much. There was nothing left to talk about. The more I dug, the more I realized I wasn't going to get the closure I wanted. Neither of them was willing to be fully honest, and that spoke volumes. When I got home, Talia was waiting for me. She'd been quiet the last couple of days, giving me space, but now she wanted to talk. Her tone was different this time, less defensive, more desperate. She started going over her story again, emphasizing how drunk she was and how it was all a terrible mistake. I listened, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see how far she'd go to twist the story. She doubled down on her claim that she thought Ron was me, saying she wasn't in her right mind and didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. She even tried to spin it as her being vulnerable, saying she felt neglected by me and that the alcohol made her act out. Hearing her blame me for what happened was the final nail in the coffin. I'd worked so hard to provide for us, taking on extra hours at work to make sure we were comfortable, and now she was using that against me. Her excuses didn't feel like remorse. They felt like manipulation. I told her I was done. There was no saving our marriage. Not after this. She begged me to reconsider, saying she didn't want to throw away everything we'd built together. But I couldn't even look at her. The person I thought I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who had no problem betraying me and lying to my face. I've already started looking into divorce lawyers. It's going to be a messy process, especially since we've built a life together, but I can't stay in this marriage. The trust is gone, and without that, there's no point in pretending we can move forward. I didn't see it, and almost believed it. After everything that had happened, I knew I couldn't keep this from the rest of the family. My parents already knew, but the fallout with Ron needed to be addressed with everyone else. At the next family gathering, I decided to rip the band-aid off and tell the truth. It wasn't easy. Standing in front of my extended family and explaining how my wife and twin brother had stabbed me in the back was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The room went silent as I laid it all out, from the party to the lies to the lingering suspicion that this wasn't the first time they'd crossed the line. Reactions were mixed. Most of the family was horrified and sided with me immediately, but there were a few who tried to downplay it, saying that maybe Ron had just made a mistake and that I should try to forgive him. Hearing that felt like a slap in the face. How could anyone expect me to forgive something like this? Ron was there, and he didn't even try to defend himself. He sat quietly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. When someone asked him if it was true, he just nodded. His silence said everything. Talia wasn't there, but even if she had been, I doubt it would have changed anything. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. After the whole interaction, my parents told me they'd decided to cut Ron off for now. They said they needed time to process everything, but they couldn't support him after what he'd done. It was a small comfort, knowing they were on my side, but it didn't take away the pain of losing not just my wife, but my brother as well. I'm still trying to pick up the pieces of my life. Some days are better than others, but the betrayal weighs on me constantly. It's hard to trust anyone when the two people closest to you turn out to be the ones who hurt you the most. I've started to work through the anger and sadness. It's not an overnight fix, but it's helping me make sense of everything. I know it's going to take time, but I'm determined to move forward, even if it means doing it alone. But on the bright side, reading all the comments have helped me see that there is better to come. I'll update when I can. Update 2. After the family gathering, the reality of what had happened began to set in even more. It was no longer a private betrayal between me, Talia, and Ron. Now the entire family knew. I'd hoped that bringing everything to light would give me some sense of closure, but it didn't. Instead, it only put a spotlight on how broken everything had become. My parents cutting Ron off brought some feelings of calm, but it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. I think a part of me wanted them to confront him more directly or to outright turn their backs on him. Instead, they seemed more heartbroken than angry. They kept saying things like they needed time to process and figure out how to handle it. That hurt in its own way, because it felt like they were leaving the door open for forgiveness for Ron, even after what he'd done. Some of my extended family also started reaching out, giving some support, but also subtly pushing the idea of forgiveness. I kept hearing phrases like, "He's your brother," and "You only get one family." Those words were infuriating. I don't care if Ron is my twin. What he did isn't something you just move past. The idea of forgiving him feels impossible. Talia, on the other hand, has been relentless. Despite me telling her multiple times that our marriage is over, she keeps calling, texting, and showing up at the house. She swings between apologizing profusely and accusing me of giving up on us too easily. At first, I ignored her attempts, but when she showed up unannounced one night, I had to lay it out for her again. I told her we were done. There's no coming back from what she did. No way to rebuild the trust she destroyed. She cried, begged, and tried to make me feel guilty by talking about the good times we'd shared. But none of it fazed me. All I could think about was the party, her lies, and how she tried to shift the blame onto me. She even tried to manipulate me, saying that it was all Ron, none of her fault, and that she was helpless with how drunk she was. Also saying how I knew how she was when she was out of it. All excuses and bad lies. Her story kept changing, and she was doing anything to try and guilt-trip me back into our marriage. It didn't work. Of course, I was too numb and lost to believe any of that half-assed story she was throwing at me. I knew she'd try every angle she could possibly, but this one was actually disgusting. She had then started trying to get me to believe that Ron had sad her. Now, from the jump, I knew this was not at all how that went down. Because yes, Ron had done me dirty. He didn't tell me anything about my wife's advances. He slept with her in my own home, and he still barely gave me the truth when I confronted him. But never would I believe he'd go that far, and to such an extent. Like, what reason could he even have? After spilling all this BS to me, I just laughed at her. And after that conversation, I blocked her number. It felt like the only way to get any peace. I've already started the divorce process, and thankfully, we don't have kids, so it should be a fairly clean break. Still, the thought of untangling our lives after 5 years of marriage feels soul-crushing. Thank you for those who are hearing me and offering advice. I'm going to divorce her and move on with it. Final update. Well, it seems like some of you wanted an update on how I was dealing with the situation. Well, it's done and the divorce has been finalized. It ended with me taking half and her taking half of everything. I still feel sad about it. I honestly thought she was the one who would have carried my children. 5 years now for nothing. The worst was the fact that she was remorseful, but I can't be with someone who would do something like this, even if she was drunk. She had still made advances on my brother. This type of thing is something I will never understand. And my own brother of all people. Hell, if she cheated with anybody else, it could be the next door neighbor, but my own twin. It still stings. Knowing that, and the fact that she had tried to cover herself by saying she thought it was me, was even worse. And just when I thought I was making progress then, Ron decided to reach out. He sent me a text saying he wanted to talk and clear the air. I didn't respond. There's nothing he could say that would fix what he did, and I have no interest in hearing more excuses. A few days later, I got a call from our mom. She said Ron had been asking her to mediate a conversation between us. She told me he seemed genuinely remorseful and that he wanted to apologize properly. I told her I wasn't interested. She didn't push me, but I could tell she was hoping I'd change my mind, and 8 can see where she was coming from. After all, we're both still her children. The thing is, an apology means nothing to me at this point. Saying sorry won't undo sleeping with my wife, and it won't erase the pain he caused. I've always believed actions speak louder than words, and Ron's actions have made it clear where his priorities lie. It's hard to explain the pain of losing not just a partner, but a brother at the same time. It feels like a double loss. 2 people who were supposed to be there in my life are now gone, not because of some unavoidable tragedy, but because of their own selfish choices. In the weeks following the fallout, I started leaning on friends more than I ever have before. I'd always been the type to handle things on my own, but this situation was too heavy to deal with alone. A few close friends stepped up in ways I never expected. They listened without judgment, offered practical advice, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. One friend in particular helped me see the value of therapy. At first, I was resistant. I didn't think talking to a stranger would make any difference. But after a few sessions, I realized how much I needed it. My therapist helped me unpack the layers of betrayal, not just from Talia and Ron, but also from the people who expected me to forgive them so easily. The therapy sessions have been a lifeline. They've given me tools to process my emotions and start setting boundaries with people who aren't respecting my need for space. It's not a quick fix, but it's a step in the right direction. One of the hardest parts of this process has been learning to trust myself again. The betrayal made me question everything: my judgment, my relationships, even my own worth. It's been a slow journey, but I'm starting to rebuild. I've thrown myself into work, not as a distraction, but as a way to focus on something productive. It's helped me regain a sense of control and purpose. I've also started reconnecting with hobbies I'd left over the years, like running and photography. These small things have reminded me that life goes on, even after heartbreak. I'm not naive enough to think the pain will disappear anytime soon, but I'm learning to live with it. Some days are better than others. On the bad days, the anger and sadness creep in, and I have to remind myself that it's okay to feel those emotions. Healing isn't easy, and that's something I'm still coming to terms with. Looking back, it's hard to believe how quickly everything unraveled. One party, one night, and everything I thought I knew about my life was shattered. The pain of betrayal is something I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it's also taught me a lot about resilience. I'm still in the early stages of rebuilding, but I know one thing for sure: I won't let this make me. Talia and Ron made their choices, and those choices don't reflect on me. I've realized that their actions say more about who they are than who I am. For anyone who's been through something similar, I want to say this: it's okay to walk away. It's okay to prioritize your own healing, even if others don't understand. At the end of the day, you deserve to surround yourself with people who value and respect you. You are not forced to stay with the same person who doesn't value the time you've spent with them. It's simply just not worth it. I've basically lost 5 years of my life. Which those times I could have done anything but be there with Talia. Honestly, if I could, I'd go back. But since you all have given me some wisdom, let me lay some on y'all. Watch your brothers, your friends, and be aware of who you keep in your life. When it comes to choosing woman, choose someone that will genuinely build you up. One of the best advice for some of you is honesty. I'm not some changed, built new man, but I'll get there one day at a time. Me and Talia don't speak. The divorce is still going through, but it's going to be official soon. As for my brother, I can't forgive him. He went behind my back and didn't even have the decency to give me proper answers. Other than that, I'm done with all this, and I'm thankful to all of you writing this out. Really did help throughout this whole situation.